Good morning, everyone, and welcome to York Regional Police Headquarters. Thank you for being here today. I'm Constable Amy Boudreau, Media Relations Officer for our service. Before we start the formal news conference, in the true spirit and intent of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, we acknowledge the land we are gathering on today is the traditional territory for many First Nations, including the Chippewas of Georgina Island and the Mississaugas of the Credits. These lands are now home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge that York Region falls under Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the William Treaties with several Mississauga and Chippewas First Nations. I would like to acknowledge their contributions to Turtle Island in their traditional ways of knowledge, medicine, technology, and so much more. For all that, we thank them. Now, allow me to introduce York Regional Police Deputy Chief Brian Bigres of the Investigations Branch to bring opening remarks. Deputy.
Good morning, and thank you. Thanks to all the media that are in attendance, thanks to all the law enforcement partners, and thanks to all of the investigators that have joined us here today, and civilian members and support staff here at York Regional Police, and from other agencies for joining us in the Project Monarch news conference. Project Monarch was an incredibly complex investigation that shut down a criminal network involved in the distribution of large quantities of illicit drugs and firearms across southern Ontario. Firearms that we believe were illegally smuggled across the international border between the US and Canada. We're very pleased to host all of you this morning so that we can share some of the details of this investigation. Before we do that, though, I'll take a moment to introduce our speakers, as well as some other attendees here for you. First speaker following me will be York Regional Police Inspector Ahmed Salia, who is the officer in charge of our Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau, Guns, Gangs, and Drug Enforcement Unit. He will walk you through some of the investigative details and results of the investigation. Following Inspector Salia will be Peel Regional Police Deputy Chief Nick Milinovich of the Investigations and Emergency Services area, who will address the gun and gang issues in Peel region and the impact that this investigation has had on their community. Ontario Provincial Police Chief Superintendent Paul Mackey will follow Deputy Milinovich. Paul Mackey is in charge of the OPP Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. He will discuss the role of the Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit, the current Provincial Gun and Gang program, and the provincial funding supporting it, and the necessary coordination with the US law enforcement. We will then have London Police Service Deputy Chief Stu Betts speak, and he will outline the increase of gun and gang activity in his area, his jurisdiction, and the impact that this investigation has had on their community. And then we'll have Walpole Island Chief Charles Sampson speak, and he will explain some unique vulnerabilities that he sees and feels in his community. Also joining us here today to be available to answer any questions, and these folks are along the my left, your right side of the room. Then they'll be able to answer some questions from the media. Are Maggie Segur from Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, covering Detroit and Canada, where the smuggling of weapons remains a top priority for HSI and all partners. HSI oversees the U.S. Border Enforcement Security Task Force, which provides U.S. and Canadian law enforcement with an operational platform to harness investigative, intelligence, and interdiction information from all partners. And representing the Canadian Border Services Agency, Assistant Director Abid Morgan from the Criminal Investigations Section here in the Greater Toronto Area. Alongside these are several other members and representatives from other partner agencies, So thank you to all of you for attending, but even more than that, thank you for your ongoing efforts to ensure the safety of our communities. I won't get into too many investigative details, as Inspector Sally will be speaking to the investigation and the results. But I will state that the overall objective of Project Monarch was to disrupt and dismantle the large-scale criminal network trafficking guns and controlled substances across the province. A criminal network that we believe were smuggling illicit firearms into Canada from the US. One of the point of entries being Walpole Island, which is a First Nations community here in Western Ontario. Thanks again to the efforts of our investigators. As you look down here in front of me, you see all of these 27 illegal handguns displayed. These handguns will not be making it into our cities, our towns, our communities, and our neighborhoods. We are tracing each and every one, the origins of each and every one of these handguns. And to date, we have determined that at least 20 of these 27 firearms did originate from the US and therefore were smuggled into Canada. The remaining 7 we continue to look into, but I can assure you that we probably would all agree the fact that these firearms potentially could land in the hands of criminals on our streets is a significant problem. One that every agency here is committed to eradicating. As individual services and agencies, we recognize that to succeed at disrupting these criminal networks, we need to work together. We all bring a level of expertise, professionalism, experience, partnerships that benefits the whole of all of us and all of our communities. I commend, beyond what I can put into words, the efforts of all of the investigators of Project Monarch, but also all of the investigators here at York Regional Police across the province and nationally for their ongoing efforts to combat organized crime, street gangs, criminality, and violent crime. So thank you to all of them. And I thank them for their dedication and their families. I look forward to further cooperation and coordination with our partners as we all fight to end the trafficking of guns and drugs across Ontario. Thank you.
Now please welcome Inspector Ahmed Salia, officer in charge of the Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau, which includes guns, gangs, and drug enforcement. Inspector.
Good morning. Thank you to everyone for joining us here this morning. Deputy Chief, thank you for your opening remarks. I'd like to echo the Deputy's comments as it relates to partnerships with our law enforcement partners. The York Regional Police, we will continue to collaborate and work closely with our partners, and the importance of these partnerships cannot be overstated. We remain very grateful for these incredibly strong relationships that we have in place. To the investigative team, I'd like to thank the team that worked tirelessly over the last 10 months on Project Monarch. This project was only a success because of the professionalism, the persistence, the dedication, and the sacrifice put forward by dozens of members attached to this investigation. There is no question, and there is no doubt in my mind, that the tremendous work put forward by our members has made our community safer here locally and provincially. Thank you for your commitment and your ongoing service. I'll move on to the investigation now. I can tell you that in October of 2021, members of the York Regional Police Guns, Gang, and Drug Enforcement Unit began investigating an individual who we believe was involved in the trafficking of cocaine and fentanyl. As the investigation began to progress, we identified a fairly robust criminal network surrounding this specific individual, who we believe were also involved in the distribution of controlled substances as well as firearms. firearms that we believe, drugs that we believe were being trafficked here in York Region and across the GTA. As such, we formed a joint forces operation with the partners you see here today, dubbed Project Monarch. As the investigation began to evolve, we identified a suspect in the London area who we believe was involved in illicitly importing firearms into Canada from the United States. We believe that one of the points of entry for these smuggled firearms was Walpole Island. Walpole Island is a First Nations community in Western Ontario. It borders Port Huron, Michigan, and is separated by the St. Clair River. This is a channel of water that acts as an international boundary between Canada and the United States. We continue to work closely with Walpole Island and their chief and council to ensure that their community also remains safe and secure. As you can see, Chief Charles Sampson has joined us here today from Walpole Island, and you'll be hearing from him shortly. On July 28th, a number of Controlled Drugs and Substances Act search warrants were executed, as well as criminal code search warrants. These search warrants were executed across Brampton, Toronto, and the London area. Over the span of the 10-month investigation, we executed a total of 22 search warrants at residences, 19 vehicles, and 2 businesses. Ultimately, the final results are as follows. We arrested 22 people. We laid over 400 charges. And if you can see on the charge list, if it's been distributed already, dozens and dozens of firearm trafficking-related offenses, as well as drug trafficking-related offenses, and an individual who was charged with conspiring to import firearms into Canada. We seized 27 handguns, 17 prohibited magazines, over 300 rounds of ammunition, approximately 9 kilograms of cocaine, 1.5 kilograms of fentanyl, over 20,000 Xanax pills, a quantity of heroin, and 41.5 pounds of cannabis. A total street value that we believe is worth approximately $1.3 million. We're also alleging that we seized offense-related property in the form of 5 vehicles and over $155,000 in Canadian currency and $9,000 in US dollars. In relation to the 27 seized firearms, I can tell you that a number of them had their serial number obliterated or altered. This is a common technique that's employed by criminals to prevent law enforcement from successfully tracing the point of origin. As the deputy indicated, 20 out of the 27 firearms have been traced to the United States, including Florida, Ohio, and Michigan, and we believe that the balance of those firearms, the 7 remaining, will also be traced to the United States. You also know that dangerous drugs can have an irreparable harm on our communities, specifically those that are most vulnerable. One of the disturbing pieces of evidence that we identified was large quantities of fentanyl that was seized that were pressed in the form of pills to appear like candy, whether it be a car or a butterfly or a variety of other things. If you can imagine a young child or even an adult accidentally consuming what they believe to be candy, I can assure you that the result would most definitely be fatal. Ultimately, this investigation has dismantled a sophisticated criminal network involved in the distribution of cocaine, fentanyl, and other controlled substances. We identified a criminal pipeline that we believe was responsible for the flow of illicit firearms coming into Canada from the United States. Firearms that we believe were destined to the hands of violent gang members and other violent offenders. I'll conclude by saying this. Our communities deserve to feel safe. York Regional Police and its partners recognize the devastating impact that guns, gangs, and drugs have on our communities, not just here locally in York Region, but provincially and nationally. We recognize that the combination of firearms and drugs can often lead to violence, and that any time we can seize a firearm, we are confident that we are saving a life and that we're enhancing public safety. And finally, thank you again to the investigative team who worked tirelessly for 10 months. Thank you for your dedication, your sacrifice, and for keeping our communities safe through your excellence in policing. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. Next is Peel Regional Police Deputy Chief Nick Milinovich, Deputy Chief of Investigative and Emergency Services. Deputy.
Thank you, and good afternoon. On behalf of Peel Regional Police, it is a pleasure to join my York, London, Ontario Provincial Police, and Walpole Island colleagues. To start, I would also like to thank all of the partners, including Canadian Border Services, the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario, Homeland Security Investigations, and all of our partners for their collaboration on Project Monarch. As important, and perhaps more importantly, I would like to thank the investigative team that's responsible for these results, the team that delivered these results. Every one of these illegal firearms that you see before you here today represents a life saved and the prevention of further harm and victimization to our communities. Illegal firearms are a priority for the Peel Regional Police Service and every service you see here represented today. In Peel, roughly half of our homicides can be attributed to illegal firearms. This is not a concern that is exclusive to Peel. It is an issue that affects all of our communities, extending well beyond the boundaries of Peel and across the province and the country. And as we see here today, because of that, an effective response requires this type of collaboration. And this is why our police service and the police services you see here today are so committed to cross-jurisdictional collaboration, joint forces operations, and specific investigations targeting illegal firearms. Along with participation in projects like Project Monarch, the Peel Regional Police will continue to invest in a variety of programs and strategies intended to address gun violence. Those strategies cannot be enforcement alone and cannot be exclusively driven by police. It requires collaboration with community partners, leaders, and stakeholders to get more illegal firearms off the street and prevent people from engaging in this type of activity. Our service continues to work closely with a variety of partners, policing, multi-sector partners, in order to address gun crime. An example of that would be our Strategic Tactical Enforcement Policing Unit. This unit is dedicated to gang suppression, strengthening enforcement, and gathering stronger intelligence, not only for benefits in Peel, but across the GTA and throughout the province. And we are seeing results. In 2022, we have seized 90 illegal firearms from the street. If you include the firearms that have been seized here today, that represents an illegal firearm taken from the street almost every other day. While this makes a difference, and those benefits can't be denied for our community, it also demonstrates how important it is that we continue with this collaboration and continue to invest in gang and gun violence as a priority, not just in Peel, but across the policing sector. Again, I would like to thank York Regional Police and Deputy Bigrath for their leadership and hosting us here today. We appreciate the opportunity to work closely with our partners and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Deputy. Please welcome Ontario Provincial Police Chief Superintendent Paul Mackey of the Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau in the Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit. Chief Superintendent.
Thank you, Deputy Milinovich, and thank you, York Regional Police, for coordinating this important announcement. On behalf of Commissioner Thomas Creek and the members of the Ontario Provincial Police, we've been pleased to assist York Regional Police with Project Monarch. Putting a stop to the criminal activities of gangs and their associates would not have been possible without the seamless collaboration between our provincial, national, and international partners. As you may know, in November of 2021, the Government of Ontario announced an investment of $75.1 million towards the fight against gun and gang violence in Ontario. As part of this investment, the OPP is leading a Guns and Gangs Joint Forces operation consisting of members of 22 police services across our province. This funding has also enhanced the OPP-led Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit to better support specialized gun and gang investigations such as Project Monarch. The Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit plays an integral role in identifying and taking enforcement action against those involved in the trafficking of firearms, ammunition, and explosives. The Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit also assists in the identification, testing, and verification of seized firearms with the assistance from the Firearms Analysis and Tracing Enforcement Program, managed by the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario. The Firearms Analysis and Tracing Enforcement Program traces the origin and conducts analysis on the crime guns recovered in Ontario. The firearms seized in this investigation are crime guns. To explain further, a crime gun is a firearm used in a criminal offense intended to be used for criminal activity, has a removed or damaged serial number, or is a weapon that's been adapted to be used as a firearm. These are not firearms that have been legally obtained by responsible gun owners. They are firearms obtained illegally with the intent to be used in criminal offenses. It is imperative that information be shared across our borders to advance firearms-related investigations and ultimately aim to prevent the importation and trafficking of these crime guns. The Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit maintains a close working relationship with law enforcement in the United States, with a member from the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives embedded in the unit. Law enforcement will continue to collectively work together to combat these organized crime groups who are exploiting our communities and compromising the safety and security of our residents. I know I speak on behalf of all the partners represented here today when I say that guns and gangs are absolutely not welcome in our communities, and we will strive to do everything possible to eradicate their presence and all the associated criminality. Thank you.
Thank you. Now from the London Police Service, Deputy Chief of Operations, Stuart Betts. Deputy.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for being here today. I'd also like to thank Inspector Cherney, who joins me, because he represents the men and women of London Police Service who are engaged in the day-to-day activity related to the enforcement for the type of behavior you see here in this type of a result. Projects the size and scope of Project Monarch simply cannot happen without a strong collaborative effort. And I would like to publicly extend my appreciation and thanks to all the agencies involved, but also to Chief Sampson and his community for their support in helping us to eradicate this problem. The City of London is not immune to the violence and presence of firearms and illegal substances. And the reality is, there are criminal organizations that operate within our city. Their activities are a danger to our community. It goes without saying that criminal organizations do not restrict their criminal enterprise to the geographic boundaries drawn on maps. Strategically focused, multi-jurisdictional enforcement with agencies from across the province and beyond that are focused on combating this borderless criminal activity is required to keep our communities safe. Make no mistake, firearms are finding their way into the hands of those who would use them for criminal purpose. And all too often, this is in relation to organized crime with devastating consequences. The London Police Service frequently collaborates with other police agencies to identify, deter, and suppress the criminal actions of those who would seek to harm those in our community. We have been a long-standing partner in the area of intelligence gathering and strategic enforcement with organizations such as the Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit, the OPP Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau, the Biker Enforcement Unit, and are pleased to be a participant in the OPP's Provincial Gun and Gang Task Force. As Ontario's 10th largest municipal police service and being situated along the 401 corridor in southwestern Ontario, our participation in these enforcement efforts is of significant importance as we're committed to contributing to a safer Ontario. the prevalence of firearms obtained through illegal means, many of which are brought into this country unlawfully, is a serious concern. These firearms are invariably instruments of death and destruction, devastating families and shattering communities. The City of London typically averages 15 shootings per year, and while not as many as larger communities, even one is too many. And in 2021, we experienced a 5-year high of 28 shootings. Sadly, we're on pace to equal or exceed that number this year. It's a disturbing trend, and it's unfolding across the province. Our gun and gang section is mandated to investigate the firearms and gang-related activities, and as of July 31st this year, they've already seized 35 illegal firearms, 17 of which were handguns, with frontline officers seizing many, many more. This exceeds the number of illegal firearms seized in our city in all of 2021. Being located along the 401 corridor, as I've mentioned, and halfway between the GTA and the US border cities, it presents a geographically attractive area for criminal groups to utilize our city for their illegal activities, something that's not lost on the members of our organization, all of whom are committed to keeping London safe, and in so doing, are often able to interdict and disrupt the activities of those who would seek to venture further into the heart of the GTA. We will continue to work with and partner with other police agencies, intelligence agencies, to disrupt this criminal behavior within our city and beyond our borders. Project Monarch is an excellent example of such collaboration, and the outcome, such as what you're hearing and seeing here today, is the result. Again, I would also like to thank the many officers and the support staff behind the scenes of all of our agencies, all of whom work together to bring this project to a successful conclusion. There's more work to be done in our fight to keep our communities safe, but we are committed to contributing to a safer Ontario. And as I said earlier, I would like to wind my speaker notes down by specifically thanking and extending that heartfelt thanks to Chief Sampson and his community for their support in this ongoing effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Now for our last speaker, Walpole Island First Nation Chief Charles Sampson. Chief.
Bonjour and good morning, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the efforts and coordination of Superintendent McIntyre and Inspector Ahmed. And Achimi Gwetch, thank you for the invitation to attend and participate in this newsworthy event, dealing with the rewards of effective policing in the fight against organized crime. There is much to be done. I also want to acknowledge the outstanding efforts of all the officers and police services involved with this operation. Your efforts and hard work are to be commended. There are long hours that have been spent in this investigation and a lot of hard work, and I think the boots on the ground should be acknowledged and forms of appreciation should be extended to them. I want to say, indeed, it is time to take collective police action to prevent serious crimes within our communities and to stop the flow of dangerous weapons and firearms through First Nation territories. These illegal weapons ultimately assist with the commitment of crime in large urban areas such as Toronto and present a real danger to public safety and to human lives. As the leader of a First Nation, I want to take the necessary steps to protect my people. To do this, I understand our police service must work with surrounding police agencies to effectively do the job. I also understand we need to work on a collective strategy with defined objectives to meet the goals we identify. To do this, the Walpole Island Police Services requires adequate resources to implement their part in the overall plan. An effective plan requires resources. And like all First Nation Police Services Ontario, we need physical resources to do the job in terms of cars, equipments, boats to protect the border. We need human resources to do the job. We need trained individuals and capacity building in terms of investigations and undercover work. And most importantly, we need adequate immediate financial resources to build a foundation for our policing services. We need those resources immediately. Our police service is terribly underfunded. We only have about 9 to 11 officers in the field, and we have to protect a border, an international border between Canada and the United States. Our islands are large, and they're situated in the St. Clair River. We have one boat. What we need is a whole Marine division to do the job effectively, and to do that, we need the financial resources. I now say this to the Premier, Premier Ford, and to Prime Minister Trudeau. Open up your considerations to flow the necessary, adequate financial resources to get this job done. First Nation Police Services want to be effective policing within our territories and within the province of Ontario. We desperately need adequate enhanced funding to get this job done. In closing, First Nation governments, like all responsible governments, believe in peace, order, and good government. Ladies and gentlemen, we need the financial resources to get this job done, and I am making that demand to the federal and provincial governments to adequately resource First Nation policing services, to work hand in hand with our partners to combat crime. We have to take these guns off the streets. We have to prevent the flow of illicit drugs into our communities, and we have to deal with human trafficking, and we have to deal with something that is close to my heart, and that is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and children and girls from our communities. Chimigwech, everyone, and I hope this message gets out to the federal and provincial governments. We need the assistance, and we need it now. Chimigwech.
Thank you. We would be pleased to take questions now. Please indicate who your question is for, and they will make their way to the podium.
Thank you. That's some great police work. Many of you talked about the importance of collaboration. So can you kind of address that again, how important it is to share information with other police services?
Thank you. I can address that question. The sharing of information and working together in partnerships is key for law enforcement and our community partners to tackle these issues. Our brainstorming, our thinking, our ability to share resources, break down the jurisdictional boundaries, the ability to access resources on a moment's notice in London or on Walpole Island by way of a phone call, a text, an email. There's a number of ways that makes us more efficient. Sharing of information, we all have officers dedicated to working on the street as well as in the back room where they're collecting information in a number of varied ways, and the ability to pick up the phone, talk to someone, call someone, and to ensure that we're working together is paramount. And the ability at each and every different time, I would say that the ability of any service individually is taxed in different ways. So at certain times we can step up and assist in a way that is needed where resources might be short in another jurisdiction. So we truly work as partners. We truly work in a way that allows us to focus on the overall commitment to public safety above and beyond everything else.
Thank you. My follow-up would be, are your investigators finding that handguns are the predominant weapon of choice? And clearly this is a strong message to criminal organizations who are wanting to smuggle guns into the country.
I would say absolutely at this point in time, handguns are a real concern specific to here in York Region, specific to here in the Greater Toronto Area. Handguns, you have the ability to covertly hide, put in your pockets, hide somewhere in the vehicle. It's a much easier weapon to access, unfortunately.
I just have a question about the fentanyl that was pressed over by candy. Just if you could maybe describe why that is. Is it pressed over candies as a way to disguise it, so maybe it will try to go unnoticed? What is the purpose?
I apologize, I can't hear anything.
I have a question about the fentanyl that is pressed over by candy. And just maybe if you could talk about why that's done. Is that done to try to disguise it, to make it look like something that's not drugs, and sort of what the method of that is?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a number of reasons for it. My personal opinion on that is anything that you can make that makes it a little more appealing, a little less looking like a poison or something that's going to hurt you, might entice someone to take it. As well as I would say there's oftentimes criminal organizations like to brand their product so that their product becomes a desired product on the street and is known. So there's a number of reasons. I can leave it to someone else if they want to expand a little bit further, but I think that pretty much addresses that question.
Can you tell me how it all happened? Did they come across the river in a boat?
Yeah, so for the investigative details, I'm going to turn it over to Inspector Salia, but I would say traditionally firearms are smuggled through air, land, and sea, and in this specific case, we believe that the weapons were smuggled in across the water. But
Can you talk about that a little bit? How did it happen at night? Was it a long trip across the lake or the river? Give me some details, paint a picture, please.
I will turn it over to Inspector Salia to come up, and if he's able to answer the question, the investigation is before the court, so what he is able to answer, I will turn it over to him to answer portions of that.
Yeah, as a deputy indicated, we're limited to some of the answers that we can provide. This is obviously still before the courts, but I'll draw your attention. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the media reel. There was actually an image there that shows the separation between Walpole Island and Port Huron. That's the body of water at the St. Clair River. I believe at its narrowest point, it's under a kilometer wide, and we believe and we allege that some of the smuggling that was taking place at that island was happening across the river. The method of entry I won't necessarily get into, but that is the point of entry.
Was it where motorboats, canoes?
Again, I won't comment on that. I can just tell you that the point of entry is as described.
There was a case recently of a drone that was found with guns up in a tree. Any indication, I think it wasn't that far from this location, any indication that this is connected?
I can tell you that that's unrelated to this investigation.
And are these all intercepted at once, or were they coming across different voyages?
No, so the firearms were not intercepted at once. There are a number of them that were seized in bulk, and there were a number of firearms that were seized in the execution of search warrants at some of the offenders' locations.
My question is for Chief Saxon. Can you explain a little bit how your community has been affected by this network of criminals going really nearby your community or even across your community, and how putting an end to it peacefully will change how your community is able to go through their daily lives right now?
First, thank you for the question. The negative impact that these activities had on our community has been very alarming. with the influx of illicit drugs within and through our community to other points in Ontario, there is a residual amount that stays within our community. And that has really presented harm to individuals. We have made great efforts to not only bust the drug houses, but we're also looking at ways and means of providing treatment services for those individuals that are affected by the drugs. It's one thing to catch the bad guys, but you have to remember that there's always victims on the street, and we look at ways and means of providing those services to rehabilitate them and to get them purposeful and meaningful jobs back within the community to help with the restoration processes that are necessary. And a lot of that involves looking back at traditional teachings and to really understand, I guess, what it means to be community and how an individual fits within the community itself there. And with human trafficking, that is another very alarming activity in and around our waters. I have to point out again that we are surrounded by water and we have very, very limited resources to patrol our territorial waters. And what I need is the financial assistance from the federal and provincial governments to beef up my services, my police service, to do the job. And to do that effectively, what I'm going to require is a whole Marine division. If you have a police service with one boat and miles and miles and miles of coastline and marshes and hunting grounds where there are many places to hide, it becomes a very daunting job to try and tackle. So there are a number of activities we're looking at in terms of cooperative efforts with the police services in our area to tackle those issues, and the development of continuing strategies to deal with the bad guys and get them off the street is in the works.
Any other questions? Okay, that concludes the formal portion of the news conference. The speakers will be available for one-on-one interviews. Should you need assistance at all, you can approach myself or our other media relations officer, Constable Beneva Armstrong, over to the left of the room here to your right. Thank you very much for attending today.